financial mechanisms will be essential to making sustainable cooling not just viable, but scalable and inclusive. We are joined by a panel of finance experts, policymakers, and innovators who will share their perspectives on bridging the financing gap and attracting long term investment into the sector. With that, I'd like to invite our distinguished moderator and speakers. Bhaskar Natarajan from AEEE, Aarti Nain from UNEP India Cooling Program, Mr. Sairam, Samrat Ray from ADB, and Sushmit Datta from Intellicap. Please give them a round of applause.
Thank you to the panel for joining AEEE and the members of the India Cooling Coalition on this important subject of unlocking finance and investments for sustainable cooling projects. Money has a strange way of disappearing when you want it. You run after it and then it keeps going further and further, because according to the bankers, they say, get me a good project, I'll find the money for it. But then when you go with a good project, questions are raised one after the other, and the money doesn't seem so easy to get when you thought it was available in plenty. I am hoping that this panel we have here today can address or highlight some of these issues that are likely to constrain and not enable unlocking of the finance and investments for sustainable cooling projects. You've already heard who they are from. They are from ADB, Intellicap, AVPN, and UNEP. I'm going to start by asking each one of them a common question. In the last 4 or 5 years, whether in your own organization or anything that you are aware of in the financing and investment landscape, not necessarily related to cooling, what is it that you have done that you can claim as a great success that has made an impact, based on which, if tomorrow stakeholders here want to approach you for a sustainable cooling project financing, what would be your suggestions based on what you have done in the recent past? Maybe I'll start with Intellicap.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, first of all, to AEEE for inviting us into this particular panel, and for the very sort of a leading opening question. I'm happy that it has come to me, because I feel that this answer may have been thought of by the other panelists as well. But just to give a background, Intellicap is a consulting institution, but we are part of the wider Avishkar group, which has a venture capital institution, it has a microfinance institution, as well as an SME finance institution. So we have been at the forefront of extending capital to those who need it for the last 20 plus years. And straight off the bat, what I can think of is where we can borrow the investment thesis of Avishkar, the venture capital institution. So Avishkar, as a venture capital institution, was instituted somewhere around 22 years ago with the core target of driving impact for sustainable and social ventures. And increasingly, it has kind of diversified into looking at multiple sectors, but it started off with an intent to focus on agriculture-based corporations and initiatives per se. So one of the things that stands out in the history of Avishkar, and what we have continued to sort of deepen our expertise on, is the intentionality of driving impact. So we are okay to consider slightly lower rate of return if we are able to sort of convince that thesis to our limited partners, our LPs, and are able to sort of go out in the market and raise capital, which is intentionally going towards meeting not only a financial objective, but also a social and sustainable development objective, then that intentionality eventually drives change on the ground through the enterprises that we invest in. So our idea of driving sustainable economic development is to hunt such enterprises who are willing to make that bet for sustainable growth, and therefore to back them with early stage capital. And I believe, because we are talking about cooling as a sector, I believe that that intentionality into funding thesis can potentially be brought in by other similar funds. We have typically dabbled into blended architectures to be able to sort of channelize capital at slightly concessional, affordable rates to our beneficiaries. The idea can be easily replicated in the cooling sector, and there is already a precedence where a Sastana cooling fund is trying to do that with equity infusion of the order of $100 million only for early stage cooling startups, so that they can be scaled. So that intentionality to drive change within a particular sector, because certain challenges have to be overcome, is ultimately going to realize into action. Yeah.
Thanks. That must be really music to the people here. Concessional is the word that everyone is looking for, concessions. Having said that, perhaps UNEP, with their vast experience across multiple countries, but perhaps you want to restrict to the Indian environment. As I said earlier, what is it that has strikingly changed the environment through UNEP's interventions in the last 4 to 5 years? As I said, not necessarily in the cooling sector, but if it has happened in the cooling sector, wonderful. And what is it that you would want to happen for the cooling sector to have a similar impact?
It has actually, sir, happened in the cooling sector.
Excellent.
My association has only been with cooling, and UNEP also, the team that I work with. We worked on district cooling systems in India and globally, but in India, I think a couple of years back, we did a feasibility study for a DCS project in Hyderabad FinTech city, Pharma city. And we worked with other organizations such as IFC and World Bank to draw up the project plan, including what would be the financial needs and all. And along with other private sector partners, we were able to ensure that the government had buy-in, and eventually the government did open up the project and hired a DCS service provider to set up a DCS system. It is beginning, the work is just beginning, but that's a success story in the sense that when you bring in the correct technical assistance in terms of very accurate feasibility analysis of the project, that this is, and not just something in the air, then you bring in the right financing partners, and you bring in the right private partner who's willing, who has the know-how to supply the technology and to operate it. When all of these come together in cooling, and you're able to convince your government counterparts, because ultimately some of the work in cooling in this sector is very dependent on their buy-in, then you have success stories.
Excellent. Going to AVPN. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Probably this is my first sort of a meeting that I have been a speaker. Thanks for that. So at AVPN, for those who don't know, AVPN is a 600-member organization wherein we focus as an ecosystem enabler and builder of 3 capital. 1 specific focus on human, 2 intellectual, and the financial. Cross-cutting across thematic areas wherein we have a platform such like climate, gender, health, and youth. So we have different platforms as such, and I represent the capital mobilization team, wherein the capital and the finance partner play a major important role. So since it's the last 5 years, it is the COVID year. So AVPN kick-started the philanthropic pool fund across all the cross-cutting sectors, specifically focusing on climate action, gender, youth, to large extent health also, wherein we have a philanthropic support to fund across the South Asia markets. And given we have an ecosystem builder, it's essentially we connect all the players in the market. It's not for profit, philanthropic organization, funding organization. It could be across all the cross-cutting organizations, wherein we bring into the theme of our whole ecosystems, wherein we list them in our platform. And a dedicated program is called the Impact Collab, wherein we list all the impact organizations, where we call as IOs, and also the funders across all the markets that we deploy the funds also, and the 3 capital that we work with. If we had to continue with same approach in the cooling sector specifically, though AVPN do not address aspect sector specific, we go with the larger thematic area of climate mitigation as such. Though other sectors would cross-cut like adaptation, resilience to a large extent, we would like to fit it in people-centric transition framework, given cooling is specifically focusing on energy efficiency. That's one. And AVPN, within AVPN, we have an impact investing team who looks for the blended finance opportunities across all the sectors, not just in cooling as per. So these are the 2 focus areas that AVPN would keep on thriving towards and continue to increase the member base of our organizations.
Thank you. ADB.
Thank you, sir. I think I wouldn't go to what ADB is, because most of the people wouldn't care, because our touch points with the regular people in terms of, we are not a commercial bank, so most of the people wouldn't care much about us. So our touch points are with the government, but most of the people would care is whether ADB continues to support government programs. I think that's the benefit we have. So, I mean, because it's a development bank, we are aligned to what the country needs. That's the primary philosophy with which it's not just ADB. All the multilaterals work in that philosophy. So basically, what we spend and where we spend every year is all determined by what the country approves. So now it's a continuous process. What ADB does is a 5-year planning, which agrees with the government, and then we implement that. Over the years, if you look at specifically energy, it is mostly transmission, distribution. You have large solar parks, transmission systems. So if you look at all these Rajasthan parks and all that, and you go back historically, at some point in time, ADB would have financed most of them, and we have financed. For each parks, I think our financing would have been at least $1 billion, at least. What we did, I mean, other than the regular money which ADB has its own resources, we are able to bring in so-called concessional financing at that point in time. And concessional financing today is very different, because technically even we struggle to find concessional financing, but at least 15 years back it was very different. So you're able to pull in all these resources, and these resources have contributed to the development of these. So that's the history. Over the years, needs and requirements have changed. Of course, energy transmission, distribution, generation still remains to be the backbone of things, but a lot of things got added. You want to move to energy efficiency, you want to bring in electric vehicles, you want to do something else, whatever is relevant. So I think not in a very big way. I wouldn't say that we have done a lot of wonders in that, but I think to some extent we have contributed to that. ESL is our classic case. In fact, I think all the MDBs contributed to ESL's development way back since 2012. Over the years, I think we are the only one who are still remaining with them. I think everyone has moved on, but I don't know, for some reason we are still there with them. But being with them gives us that ability to continue what we started. I think electric vehicles was an extensive program which ADB did. Of course, the lighting program, where ADB was the contributors. I mean, I think every multilateral contributed to that. But electric vehicles was a large program which ADB contributed. A lot of people may not know that ADB finances through ESL roughly implementation of 5 million smart meters across the country. As on date, we have implemented close to around 2.5 million across them, across 3 states, approx 3 states, and we will continue to implement that. So I mean, I wouldn't call that exactly energy efficiency, but yes, to an extent, it remains energy efficiency. And I think, if I understand correctly, that one program of ESL still continues to be, in some state that actually remains to be the only smart metering program being run by them. So, of course, you have this bidding and all that, but then this actually remains live. I think what is an important learning for us is, over the years, the way you look at programs changes. I mean, most of these programs are project financing. So, of course, for us, it's sovereign, the government of India guarantees, so I mean, there's no case of default for us, but we still contribute to the organizational development. I mean, yes, we wouldn't care about the IRRs, but we still care whether the organization sustains. So, it is basically project financing which we have been doing, and there are technical support which basically builds all these organizations. But what we have also learned is we need to start moving at and looking at outcomes, rather than just pick up a project, fund it, finish it, and write a project completion report and get away. I think we'll have to stop doing that. So, and World Bank does it very well. I mean, if people, for information, World Bank, what it has, it's called, I'm forgetting the name, it's called P4R, Program for Results. It's basically you define outcomes and you finance those outcomes. And those outcomes can fund project components, but essentially what you're trying to do is drive the outcomes, which basically means you're mandating the organizations to meet the outcomes and then come to the bank for financing. So they want you to take action first. So currently we are implementing this for the RDSS program, the Distribution Reforms Program, which everyone knows. We are doing that loan in West Bengal, and we have exactly done that. And what we can see is the government and the utilities there are now being forced to take action. Actions they would have taken eventually have been deferring, but because we have mandated them, they are more cognizant of the fact. So I think these kind of things, give us the ability to bring them into new areas, energy efficiency. So we have been talking to BE. I think BE is contemplating a program with DPIIT to look at energy efficient air conditioning replacement, and I think they might eventually come up with some PLI scheme or whatever they decide. To course, ADB is not exactly part of the conversation. I think it's mostly supported by the World Bank, but we will now slowly try to get into this at the state level. So we'll have these conversations with the state agencies, look at how policy changes or programs can be designed, and we then finance those programs, which in turn then make us relevant. To my earlier point about why would anyone care, is through those programs we would want to make people care about us, because then that money eventually through the government will flow to the people. I mean, whether it could be consumers, whether it could be industries, it could be ESCOs, I mean, whoever is an implementation partner in that program. And that's when you become part of organizations like us. So I think that's the full cycle and circle which we are trying to do. Hopefully, we should be able to do something in the next 1 year. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Ever since the launch of the India Cooling Action Plan a few years ago, it's now more than well established that cooling is something that is a priority for the government. And in this connection, perhaps I would want to ask you a follow-up question. If you had the power to design or identify projects which you would want to support in the cooling space, what would be the top 2 areas, whether it would be, I know that ADB works only through the government institutions. In this situation, what would be the kind of projects that you are looking for? I'm saying that if cooling definitely is a need, and you have the power to now launch this program, look forward to your suggestion.
So I think we wouldn't look at cooling directly. I think what we would look at is the reasons why cooling becomes relevant. So, I mean, we would probably work with the government to fund a demand response program, let's say. On that demand response program, cooling could be one of the the outputs which basically drives an outcome. So I think that's an approach. I mean, even if you look at the BEE's program, the PE program is not designed to say that you are going to do an AC replacement. It is about you're trying to alleviate heat stress. So that's the outcome which you're trying to achieve. And the air conditioning and moving to 5-star air conditioning is just the many levers which you would use to achieve that. So I think that is an approach, because if we singularly drive an AC replacement program or whatever it is, I mean, AC becomes more easier because that's the most immediate thing which comes everywhere. But then it might not even address the outcome which we are trying to address. So we are more designed by the outcome. So we will have to look at all that. So we would look at that. So maybe it's a demand response program. And also, what is also important for us is, it has become increasingly difficult for us to justify within our system that public investments are the only way to address a problem. A lot of times we get this question that through these large public investments, because we have the ability to drive large investments, are you not trying to crowd out these public-private investments? So equally important for us is there has to be a parallel private sector investment. So now a lot of our evaluations, even though we are not purely evaluated on the the internal rate of return, because we have a benchmark, but that's really more of an economic activity and not a revenue activity for us. But we are also being evaluated how much is the private capital which gets contributed to this. So even in these kind of cooling programs, I think what would drive is what is the amount of private capital. In terms of project level, I think what we basically do is any infrastructure project, like if we are, ADB does a lot of financing for skills in India. Of late, we have started doing that because it's all aligned to the national mission. And through these, there are these large skill universities which ADB finances. There is one in Assam, there is one in Madhya Pradesh. These are large universities. There, because it's part of building design, we always insist that the buildings have to be certified. And that's like a precondition to the design, and that's like a precondition to the loan. So now, but the skills is one. I mean, let's say even if ADB looks at a tourism program, and let's say you're trying to create a tourist recreation facility, ADB would insist that you make it a sustainable procurement, you make it green, or whatever it is. So these are the other ways where we can contribute. The other thing is, like any commercial bank, our private sector, they keep on looking at, but then for them it's purely an investment. I think for them, they look at a project. For them, IRRs are important. But they have started looking at cooling extensively. Yeah.
Thanks. Coming to AVPN, in the area of cooling, what do you think is where you want to make an impact? Supposing you were to start designing, asking for financing, what would be the contours of such a program?
So, given AVPN looks as the holistic as a sector rather than a sector-specific idea or a project-specific thing. As long as it interconnects to the market-specific or geography-specific, say in this context, if it's India's climate goal, we would be happy to be part of it. If it is cross, say for example, if it is in the cooling sustainable cold chain process, or if it is in the chiller process, or if it is working with SMEs to a large extent to attract finance. So essentially AVPN brings in all the ecosystem players wherein we can have a pool sort of a fund and ensure that we would like to, probably the one thing that we will advance is how we can move the pilot projects into a scalable and system change. Essentially we would like to see that is it possible to build it in the muscle memory of the system itself is one thing that we will be driving. As long as it is interconnecting and achieving to the national targets and emissions reductions, and then it is essentially the climate mitigation at the forefront, though adaptation and resilience could also be part of it. And given we focus across all the cutting areas like gender, youth, and also education to a large extent, which is skill, we would be happy to know about like how exactly the climate cross all these intersection also would be applicable in the cooling sector to an extent.
Thanks. Coming to UNEP, the success of the Hyderabad project, of course, is well recognized. And that's a very technology-heavy oriented project looking at district cooling. Is UNEP, I mean, I'm not saying that you talk on behalf of UNEP, but since you are a key person in the UNEP cooling team, what do you think would be the two important areas in the next 3 years where you think UNEP can make a major impact, considering all the ground level challenges in terms of financing? I mean, it's not that UNEP will directly put in money, but whatever you do, like the Hyderabad project, moves towards financing.
Yeah, we cannot put money. UNEP is
Yeah,
not a
I know.
bank.
Yeah.
I wish it were. One area where we are particularly trying to focus for the next, not just 4, probably the next 10 years, is passive cooling and thermal comfort in housing, especially for the urban poor. Which is, I think, one of the most cost-sensitive market segments in the country. So the challenges are, multiple. And we are trying to work with both the private sector and the public sector and government, which is different. Public sector would mean, and the multinational bank system as well, is to how to ensure that that incremental cost of sustainable coolings, and especially for low-income housing, it is passive. The materials that you use in construction and the way you design the housing, how can that be covered through any additional financing? So that is one particular area we are looking at, whether it is through concessional finance or it is through risk guarantees or grant-based. Grant, of course, would only be small because you can only do the piloting with it. Most importantly, we are working a lot with states in this already and will continue to multiply our efforts, is how the state funding, state have multiple schemes going on for housing and urban development, how to dovetail with that to bring in financing for passive cooling, especially in low-income housing. The other area where we are very focused is skill development of private sector, which is the real estate developers and the contractors and the construction workers, and this is across the spectrum from low of cost-effective buildings to the high-end buildings, is how do you build their capacities to be able to deliver it on scale. So for example, both people who are getting trained to be professionals, how do you start institutionalizing this education? It should not be one-off certificate course on Coursera or Udemy or something, but it is something which is integrated into the college curriculums of India on how to do this. Similarly, for the developers, is how do we work with the real estate associations to build capacities on this, and also how to make champions who are further able to take the And on construction worker, for example, we are trying to work closely with the ministries who are involved in urban development. For example, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and specifically PMAY and other, on how to increase the skills of workers who are particularly engaged in self-built construction. Because with developer-led, the developer can take the owners. Should they want to, they can take the owners. But with self-built housing, doing anything which is for cooling, the construction methods, the material, the design methods and all, it's very difficult to get across them. So that is the two areas. Both are very challenging, but we are trying to.
Thanks. Coming to IntelliCap, you talked of Avishkar and the funds that are available at your disposal. How do you think these funds can support cooling in the broadest sense, as you've heard all the other panel members also talk? And how do you think you want to ask people to utilize this fund for cooling projects?
Right. Maybe I'll just try to respond to this question a little more generally, not just focusing on Avishkar, because I want to build on something that Samrat mentioned about the World Bank's support to the government of India. And AEEE is also part of this journey, as well as CLASP along with us, where we are helping World Bank essentially define the contours of the program that that Samrat just alluded to. One of the many activities in that program will focus on, potentially focus on replacement. Nothing is kind of set in stone yet, but that's one intervention being sort of evaluated. But the other point which Samrat mentioned was increasingly people are taking a dim view of public resources being going towards private economic activities, and therefore what the broader World Bank supported program is trying to do is institute a blended finance facility which is potentially going to be only focused on the cooling sector and source capital from different capital providers, including commercial capital providers and going all the way down to philanthropic capital providers, to ultimately extend that money at an affordable rate for cooling activities. What are those cooling activities that would be eligible to be funded under that particular facility is right now being designed. But what have been sort of deliberated are it could be potentially lent as affordable concessional project finance for large manufacturers manufacturing cooling equipment. It could be lent as potentially catalytic junior debt to MSMEs so that the MSMEs are able to attract more commercial financiers. But at the same time, it will also have a sidecar technical assistance facility, because as we heard from the panel that it's not just about money, but it's also about the gap in technical capacity that has to be built and bridged before we can extend capital for these kinds of activities. So I would request the entire sector to kind of be on the lookout for this facility to be instituted. It is going to be instituted with a certain amount of seed funding from the World Bank and Government of India, and then it will go out and source the remaining sort of pot of money and eventually start deploying it in the form of primarily debt, but also we are evaluating whether there should be an equity arm to this as well. So more than Avishkar, I would say that there is going to be a specialized cooling focused funding facility that is going to specifically come to address the challenges of funding in this particular sector. So that is one of the ways in which the current thought process in the wider World Bank DPIIT AHEAD program, that program is called AHEAD, is kind of conceptualizing of mobilizing capital. Obviously, there will be public resources being channelized towards building of certain enabling infrastructure like testing facility, upgrading the existing testing facilities, so on and so forth. Perhaps there will be a certain amount of incentives also lent out to the private sector for large-scale manufacturing of sustainable and efficient cooling devices. But primarily the main source of funding is going to be through this blended finance facility. And apart from that, I think what Avishkar does is Avishkar has, over the years, has had several funds. We do not have any specific intentional focus on cooling per se. We are always on the lookout for any fairly early stage enterprise that is innovative and can scale and is potentially going to create an impact on the broader sustainable development narrative. They become attractive investees, and our primary mode of investment is in the form of equity. So this is how we can potentially address the financing needs of the sector.
I'm sure that is a lot of great music to the people here, that this facility is really going to come up with a reasonable pot of money that will be blended, concessional, or whatever terms we want to use. Certainly, I'm sure all of us will be looking forward to that. Moving on, I think we have a short question for the second round. I would want to ask each one of your views on if tomorrow your organization were to put out an RFP on the cooling space. I'm afraid, I know you people have talked about a broader space, but we do have UNEP, which is right now focused heavily on the cooling side. What is that one policy change that you are looking from the government, central or the state, that you think your RFP should work towards so that there is a huge response from the stakeholders? Yeah.
Right. So I think again I'll lean into the current institutional knowledge that we have sort of collated as part of designing the AHEAD program for Government of India, and there are several kind of policy interventions that are being contemplated. Some of those include upward revision of the minimum energy performance standards, as well as extending funding for manufacturing of locally manufactured components for efficient cooling devices. But I think one thing that, and this would be preaching to the choir, especially if we are talking to AEEE, because district cooling is increasingly seen as a potential intervention that can reduce not only the energy, peak energy demand, but also extensively reduce the environmental footprint of cooling, especially standalone cooling devices. So, but there are several things to be done on the policy front for district cooling systems to become streamlined. So I think if there is one sort of initiative that can be taken right away, and especially keeping in mind the long-term impact on the cooling sector, then perhaps working on refining and defining the district cooling ecosystem is perhaps going to be, for me, the first thing that one should work on. Although there are other low-hanging fruits, but this can potentially have the biggest impact in the long run.
Thanks. Arati, apart from district cooling,
This is from the perspective of attracting finance.
Yeah.
So I would say, based on my experience, and this is not as UNEP, it is consistent demand for the supplier. Whether it is district cooling, it's energy efficient air conditioners, private sector, whether it's a bank or it's a manufacturer, likes to come in where there is a long-term pipeline of demand and market stability. That is something that the governments can ensure through policies, policies which are consistent. Now, for example, DCS, yes, there can be different set of policies in the sense that you have mandated zones, designated energy intensive consumers who are designated as mandatory. They have to take a DCS connection. But apart from that, in terms of distributed, consistent application of building energy codes, consistent MEPs, a very comprehensive roadmap of how you are going to change MEPs. Like, there should be a consistency in the sense that you change it in 2025, you plan for 2027, but you never do it in 2027 or something like that. So that consistency from the government must definitely be there, both in terms of coming out with comprehensive policies and applying them, which ensures that there is a demand for the private sector finance and the private sector technologies.
yeah, just a quick follow-up on that. You've been a part of the building codes and implementation framework. The 1718 code is still not 100% notified across the country. Where do you think is the bottleneck, and would UNEP or any institution want to throw their weight behind to see that the new code that has been released last year, the sustainability code, doesn't take 10 years to go across the country? And that would definitely impact financing for the building sector, right?
Three things. One is the state departments, because ultimately the code is a state subject. More coordination between the state departments. I think I say it in every forum where this question is asked, is that the code implementation per se, the notification rests with the state designated agency which answers to the energy department or ministry, but it is to be implemented through the local building bylaws, which is the responsibility of the urban local body, which reports to the urban development department, which in turn reports to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. So there needs to be more coordination between them, because what happens is that the codes are notified, but the linkage with the bylaws doesn't happen so easily. So that is one thing. And also when you implement the code, it has to be simplified a bit. I speak to a lot of developers, and there are times when they turn back and say, just tell me which document I have to sign to show that I have complied. And I've complied. They show me the drawings. I'm an architect. I understand. They show me the tender documents. I know they have procured the double glazed units and everything. But quite often in states, sorry to say, the document or set of document which enables them to prove their compliance is not there. It is not simplified. Lastly, developers do need project finance, incremental project finance, sometimes for the incremental cost of passive cooling. I have talked to banks in India, and unfortunately, while the green building rating systems have seeped into the system in the credit worthiness check, code hasn't. And again, going back to the same list, they said, what is the proof of compliance? If a project, if a developer comes to me tomorrow and says, I have an ECBC 2017, 24, whatever compliant building, what is the proof that I can say, okay, he has shown me the proof, I have given him the loan, and after 5 years, I'll check back and say, yes. So those three things. Thank you.
AVPN, policy change that you think will drive investment.
So with respect to AVPN, given we deploy capital towards impact with the impact organizations, and though directly we don't involve directly working with the state government, but we deploy capital to impact organizations to do the impact work that they have been doing. So that's how we will continue. From what we have been hearing on the ground from few of the organizations that we have been engaging with in the past, it's one of the things that is the cold storage room specifically focusing on agriculture. Two, is there a possibility on the evidence-based approach that we could bring in the policy, specifically on sustainable transport for the cold chain, the whole infrastructure, logistics and demand and supply. And then there has been more conversations on passive cooling and also high-rise building. So these two aspects is also coming through. And there are certain aspects of it where it is more concentrated on urban, all the municipal bonds, any conversation that happens in the finance side. Is there a possibility to have a convergence in the panchayat side? Because the whole cooling agriculture is specifically focusing more in the agriculture area, which is the mostly semi-urban or rural urban areas only. So essentially, is there a possibility to drive that factor is one thing that we are hearing from the impact organizations on the ground. And there have been a lot of conversations with the other ecosystem enablers where they are saying like the demand for the GCC or the data centers in India is blooming. There might be more cooling related technologies might come in, wherein a sort of blended finance would be required for philanthropy to be part of it to avoid the guarantee loss, all these aspects. There is some conversations around that also. So we look into what impact organizations have been informing us. So we would like to see how India is going to shape its cooling policy to a large extent in coming year.
ADB.
So I think we are a beneficiary of government policy. So our programs are part of government policy. So I wouldn't, so we have to be careful about the way we want to design it. And of course, it's the decision of the government. But I think what I understand, these kind of aspects, cooling and all that, a lot of people talk about it from a project level. I mean, you want to do it here, you want to do it there, you want to replace ACs, you want to do this. Yeah, this is fine. I mean, that because you have to have an implementation angle. And other than programs, I think, because I represent ADB sovereign side, ADB wouldn't, because this is purely private sector. I mean, there is no reason why an ADB and a World Bank should start getting into, funding a district cooling project. I don't think so. Our boards would approve it. More importantly, even the government would approve it. So it's out of question. So I think what we are now trying to do is go more upstream. So ADB is now currently working with the Department of Economic Affairs and the Chief Economic Advisor to look at what's the 2070 pathways for India. That's more upstream. Now, a lot of us know the reactions of government of India in Baku when the climate number came in. So we are now moving upstream. Now we have to now start looking at what's going to happen 5 years down the line. I mean, the current context is there. I mean, it's just that even in the current context also we are not able to implement a lot of things, but someone has to start looking forward. So we are now looking at that. So that's one conversation we are part with the government and what could be the pathway, and subsequent to that, what could be the actions which the government would need to start taking today so that they can be implemented downstream. That's one. Then you have these initiatives like this 100 cities, which is the NITI initiative, which is where ADB and World Bank are partners. So there, I mean, energy is of course a part of urban planning. So energy gets part of the conversation. So that's one. The other important aspect is, procurement. Cooling, yes, if you make a building and you want to put an AC to cool it, yes, that's an approach. But if you want to make the building itself, cool by its own, which basically means that you have to bring in more sustainable procurement into the system. What I understand is there is a bit of an issue there because we, through our large infrastructure programs, we try to push in sustainable procurement, but India's GFR rules is only a guide to the state. So when you go to the state and say that implement sustainable procurement, they say, where is the law? So I think someone needs to address that. Of course, no state would try to deviate what the government, the principal financing body of the government comes out with the rules. Whether it is applicable or not applicable, you intend to follow it to the extent possible. But I think what's becoming more important is that because of this, there are cost implications. Now, if you make a building for 100 crores and trying to get it certified, not certified, trying to make it compliant to a green building or let's say more efficient building, adds up to 10 crores. For a bank like me, I'm very happy because I'm getting more money to deploy, but for a state, it is about paying back more money to me. So why would a state do that? So I think we have now started becoming part of that conversation. Like we look at steel. Steel ministry came out with an intent to look at green procurement a few months back. So behind the backs, there is this conversation going on. How does institutions like us bring in experiences for other countries to do that? A lot of times we are being asked this question is, the pathways which we are trying to take, show me the evidence that they have worked in other countries. Unfortunately, it is very ironic that a lot of these studies we have now been seeing is there is no real evidence that it has worked. So we take examples of US and all that, but just show me one way that it has worked in the US. So that's a challenge, but I think increasingly this conversation has gone upstream. So institutions like us, I think more have to contribute to that conversation. So at least we can help shape the government policy to some extent.
Thanks. Before I throw this open for questions to the audience, I'm going to put each one of you in a bit of a spot. I am the Minister for Power, and each one of you comes to me as the Director General of the National Energy Efficiency Organization. I'm going to ask you, please prepare a note telling the Prime Minister, I want to take over the India Cooling Action Plan. Will you or will you not do it? You've got the question?
Who's going to write that note?
You're all the DGBE, right? I'm the minister. I'm calling you and saying, prepare a note for me for the Prime Minister, take over the Cooling Action Plan, I want to be the boss.
The Chief Minister wants to do that.
The Power Minister wants to be the boss for the Cooling Action Plan. Will you do it or will you say, sorry sir, it's somebody else's baby, I'm not going to do it? Your comment, quickly.
That would be my answer.
No, you won't do it? Okay. You?
I think it has to be done, in my opinion.
Okay.
It has to be done in order for us to move on the targets and the vision that we have envisioned as part of the cooling action plan.
Thank you.
As an ecosystem builder and enabler, you love to be part of that ecosystem as well.
Yes.
So if he's the power minister, then I think he should do. But if you change that role to a different minister, which is renewable, maybe he'll not. But yeah.
No,
I think of course I think if he's a power minister, I think he still has some case to push.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Over to the audience. Quick, short question.
Thank you, Chairman. A question to LDP. how ADB can be possible in SME sector power cooling system, how helpful in the ADB in, because large chunk of the SMEs in India.
So ADB doesn't lend to the SMEs directly. Unfortunately, ADB, it is sad to say, but ADB doesn't have a direct program with the SMEs. But through, I think, SIDBI, ADB is currently working on a line of credit with SIDBI, which will eventually lend to the SMEs. We wanted to do what we have is a policy-based lending, but that was purely a budgetary support to Ministry of SMEs to promote these clusters. Yeah, that's an intervention, but unfortunately ADB has not done much on SMEs.
Right? Yeah, okay. All right, great. Okay, go ahead. Short. Go ahead.
I draw attention to Samrat when he said that unfortunately, there is no evidence of any outcomes, the larger outcomes for these multilateral organizations drive, including the IMF or the World Bank. Case in note, I have said, it is in the archives of the UN, that I have said it on record that keep the IMF and World Bank out and I think we could drive the sustainable and positive outcomes. So I would like the specific comment or evidence-based, if there is any that you are allowed to share or if you can share for everyone. Thanks.
So if you just reframe the question again, I just want to, yeah.
I quote, unfortunately, there is no evidence of the driven outcomes of the interventions of the lending even in the US, because it was in the context of the US.
Okay.
Thanks.
So, okay. So, when you're doing this modeling study, you look at scenarios. Now, in this specific case, I think we are doing like 8 scenarios, which includes 3 growth trajectories in India to achieve Viksit Bharat 2047 target, $13,000 per capita. Now, every trajectory gives me a way. Some curves look this and that. If out of all these curves, now you had to choose the most realistic curve. Of course, these are ranges, and if you had to choose a realistic curve, and you say that, okay, because power becomes the most important part of all this net zero thing, you say that till 2040 or 2045, let's, 2045 onwards, let's start tapering down coal because that's when you want to, push something. Or you say that you start building nuclear and, you remove some of the other equations and all that. So the model does all that. Yes, I mean, if you look at the model, it looks to be, okay, yes, this is a way, you're giving time for the technology to happen. But then the challenge which we see is from a decision maker is, then people say, is that, see, you look at energy consumption. Today, we are at what, 1,100 per capita? US is what, 13,000 per capita? Our modeling study showed that in 2047, we would be the average, the current world average. That's in 2047. The current world average is what, 3,500? In 2047, we will be 3,500, which basically means that we are not even close to US and China and all that, so that's ruled out. Now, because there is that trajectory which is there, which is already there, so someone has reached that. So then people ask us, if the US has already reached the 13,000, show me evidence that if they have reached it like this and they have been able to reduce emissions because of these kind of actions they have taken. And they may not be exactly consistent to what the model says, but they would have tweaked it, all that. So, I mean, partly what we have looked at is, I mean, it is very difficult to say, looking at whatever evidence which is there, that, this is the trajectory we would follow. So I think my response to the US was more about trying to draw corollary. It's not that, the US has achieved something and they have done it right or wrong. That's not the point. The point is basically, if I had to emulate or if I had to take lessons or I have to take references of they moving from 0 to 13,000 and the actions they have taken, have they really contributed to something? And whether if we try to take similar actions or actions tweaked to certain extents, will we also get the same or similar kind of results? I think that's the challenge which we are running into.
Great. Thank you very much, and thanks the panel for your very insightful comments. Let me hand it over to the cooling team.
Thank you to all our speakers. That was indeed a solutions-driven discussion. And thank you to the Alliance for an Energy Efficient Economy for curating it. As we close this session, we also bring to close what has been a remarkably insightful and engaging final day at the ICC Annual Conclave 2025.